Welcome to The Pilot Life, the show where we sit down with people who are passionate about aviation. My name is Brendan. I've been a commercial airline pilot for over 20 years, and in that time, I've heard some incredible stories. This is the show that I share those with you. Welcome on board. All right, welcome back, Pilot Lifers. I'd like to say another living room, another pilot sitting across the table. Today we're sitting with Juno's son, Juno's own son, Captain Doc Eide. Doc, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, happy to have you here. Born on the banks of the Mendenhall River, huh?
Not quite. Really in a hospital.
That's right. Well, kind of this connection that we made is one of my first mentors that I had when I got to Alaska Airlines was Captain Greg Perry, who will be on the show eventually. But Greg said, hey, you got to sit down with my mentor before you sit down with your own mentor. And so he said, you got to sit down with Captain Doc Eide. I had never been to Juno until I started flying here, right? So what was life like in Juno back when you were a kid, back in the mid-50s?
It was actually pretty cool because I didn't have anything to compare it to. And you played Little League Baseball. If you played in the rain. You played on dirt. Played high school basketball for 4 years. We won state 2 of those years. We flew to every game.
Wow. Because Juno, for those who don't know, the only way to access it, and a lot of those southeast cities in southeast Alaska, is either by boat or by plane.
That's it. When we went to Anchorage, we took a jet. We went to Fairbanks, we took a jet. Went to Annette Island to play Ketchikan, we took a jet. Yeah.
Is that where your passion for flying started? Was all this flying that you did, or was it earlier on in life?
That's just a way of life too. And there are more pilots and more airplanes in the state of Alaska than any other state of the union.
Yeah.
Juno had 2 airlines in 1964 when I graduated. One was Pacific Northern Airlines, which flew 720s and Constellations, and Pan American, which flew 707s into Juno. There was great competition between the 2 airlines, and one left Juno for Seattle at 12, and the other left at 12:05, and that was it. So I was captain of the Juno basketball team, and I was asked by Guy Russo, who was the district sales manager for P&A, if I wanted to go to work for him as soon as I graduated. And I said, sure. So I'll be throwing bags or something. He said, no, you're going to be an agent. I said, I'm 18. I know nothing about being an agent. And he said, well, here's what you're really going to do. You're going to go into Pan Am's line about 11 o'clock, their ticket line, and get people that you know to switch over to us. And Pan Am had Roger Grummett, who held the school scoring record in Juno, 4 years ahead of me. He worked for Pan Am and went into our line.
Oh, wow.
And stole our passengers.
Yeah. Had you taken any flying lessons at this point, or?
Yeah, I had.
Okay.
I had a private license just because everyone seemed to do it. And what I really wanted to do was go to the Air Force Academy. But my vision wasn't 2020. But my mother was Ernest Greening's secretary when he was governor of the state of Alaska, and now he was a new senator to the new state of Alaska. And I got the principal appointment to West Point.
Wow.
I was also smart enough to realize that I couldn't be one of those square meal eating guys.
Yeah.
So I turned that down. And my father was the high school chemistry teacher, and I ended up in pharmacy and got a good scholarship there and thought I could play basketball and baseball, which really didn't work at the University of Montana. I started dating an Alaska captain's daughter, and he said, you don't want to be a pharmacist, be a pilot. And he got me going in the pilot direction. Here I am.
What was he flying?
What was he flying?
Yeah,
At that time, he was flying PBYs and Convair 240s.
Wow.
Out of Southeast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And in 71, he was on the 727. back at the Air Force Base in South Carolina, flying to Guantanamo for Alaska Airlines.
Oh my gosh.
I wasn't sure if you knew we did that. Yeah, we had.
Well, yeah, because back then in 71, the airline industry was not, it was regulated.
It was.
So Alaska kind of had to scrap for various flying, right?
It did.
Yeah.
It did. The Hercs flew all over the world, and the 727 was on a government contract, and they were based in Charleston.
What was your journey then to kind of build up your time and experience?
Well, I ended up with about 120 hours, and United Airlines came out and said, we're hiring pilots with 2 years of college and 80 hours.
What?
Yeah, true story.
This was in the mid 60s?
This was in 66.
Okay. So United comes and you apply for that job.
And I actually took the stay nine, and they wanted me until I dropped out. And then they found out.
I see.
I mean, I'm 20 years old with no military obligation. What a deal.
Right, right. So you're in Montana, you're flight instructing, building up your time and experience. Dreams of being an airline pilot?
Sure.
Yeah, why not, right?
I was going back and working for Pacific Northern every summer between college. And then, of course, I had to do my 6 months active duty, so I headed for Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came back, Pacific Northern Airlines had merged into Western. So I went and applied with Western, and they said, the guy's name was Jim Hunter, and he said, well, if you're doing a good job in your job, and we hire you as a pilot, that's double training.
Mm.
However, if you're not doing a good job, we don't want you anyway. So I said, how about if I quit? Will you hire me?
Yeah.
That didn't go very good. So then John Richardson, Rich Richardson, was my roommate. He was a mechanic in Seattle for Alaska. And he called me up and said, there's a note on the board here that Alaska's going to hire 3 classes in 1970, and they're going to take company employees first.
Mm.
So I went back to Juno and got a job as a ops agent, and 4.5 months later, I was hired as a pilot.
So it's 1970. You apply to be an agent there. You get hired.
In 69.
In 69,
Yeah.
you got hired at Alaska as an agent.
Yeah.
That was going to be your in to get hired as a pilot. Yeah. Okay. How much flying time did you have at this point?
1,000 hours.
1,000 hours. Single engine time, multi-engine time?
A little bit of multi-engine from flying charter with Puget Power. Yeah.
Okay. So 1,000 hours. You get hired with Alaska Airlines in 69. And what plane were you hired onto?
The Twin Otter.
The Twin Otter.
And that was the best airplane for me because it went slow enough I could keep up.
What was the fleet makeup of the airline at that time?
Let's see. We probably had 4 Hercs,
Mm-hmm.
and we had maybe 8 Grumman Gooses.
Mm-hmm.
We had a couple PBYs and a Convair 240 and maybe 4 727s.
Okay.
This is just winging it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what was it like flying the Twin Otter? Were you based in Juneau?
We were. We had 4 Twin Otters.
Yeah.
And it was great fun. Yeah. The best job I ever had was flying captain for Alaska Airlines in the summer on the Twin Otter. And the hardest job I ever had was flying captain on the Twin Otter in the winter.
What was a typical day like back on the Otter? Because as of now, because I'm thinking of the airline now, Juneau, Sitka, Ketchikan. Was it those same cities?
So we went, say one Twin Otter would go Juneau, Petersburg, Wrangell, Ketchikan, and then back.
Okay.
And another one would go Juneau, Haines, Skagway, Juneau.
Okay.
Then over to Gustavus, Glacier Bay, and back, and to Sitka and back. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had, let's see, in the Twin Otter, we had layovers in Sitka, Wrangell, and Ketchikan.
Okay. Yeah. Amazing. Were all the Twin Otters based in Juneau?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a Juneau base, there was an Anchorage base?
Yep.
at the time, Seattle, and then is that it
Yeah.
at the time?
Well, they're in up until 72, there was a catch can base,
Oh, really?
and they had the 180s and the Grummans and
Wow,
the PBYs.
amazing. So you're a new co-pilot on the Twin Otter in 71.
In 70 was my first one.
In 70 was your first one. And then the following year, that was when we lost a 727 in Juno.
In 71, yeah, September 4th.
Yeah. And I don't know if we want to talk about that. Is there?
I don't have a problem talking about it.
Yeah.
I just went over, I just saw on YouTube a pretty good explanation of the crash and how at glassy water, the Doppler VOR could move 29 degrees. It could move more than that, but it moved 29 just enough to get that bearing.
Yeah. So that airplane was doing a VOR approach.
It was doing a localizer.
It was doing a localizer approach, and it had to do with the installation on Sisters Island, right?
It did. Yeah.
And somehow with the glassy water, it would bend that signal. And so initially when they came out, they said it was the crew's fault, right?
Headlines of the paper.
Of course, right? And then with the follow-up, they said, no, this happened. The crew thought that they were on course.
Dave Zarung
Yeah.
has done a wonderful job for Alaska Airlines and our industry, the pilots, to prove that it wasn't pilot error.
Yeah. And the airline was probably fairly small at that time. So I'm assuming everyone kind of knew everyone. And
Oh yeah, I was hired at number 164. There was one guy behind me in my class, and then two classes right after that. So we probably had 180 pilots.
wow. What does that do to a pilot group when something
Oh,
like
I think everyone really, it became very cohesive. There had been cry for DME on the localizer forever. That accident would not have happened if we had DME. And unbelievably, within a very short period of time, DME was on the localizer.
Yeah, DME is distance measuring equipment. So without that, they didn't know exactly how far they were from.
Just using the bearings,
Right.
and you use the ADF, and that's not, as you know, not very steady.
Yeah.
And the Sisters Island radial was steady. They thought they had passed.
Wow. Crazy, right? And Juno is a challenging airport anyways, right?
Well, someone asked me, what's the hardest airport? And if talking to any of my compatriots, everyone says Juno, but I was born there.
Yeah.
And so I had a little different
Yeah.
outlook.
Yeah.
I
And
thought the hardest was Valdez.
south down there where the oil tanker went in there, right?
Exactly.
'Cause doesn't it kind of curve in there a little bit through that?
Yeah. And your VFR off Johnstone,
Yeah.
and you make that turn, you're committed.
Yeah. What was were there any memorable flights flying around in that Twin Otter?
A respected Czech airman was. We had the dual switch for ATC and then for interphone.
Yeah.
We're at 7:00 in the morning going to Petersburg, and I was brand new, and he said, "Now, the one thing you got to remember, and then is make sure you're on interphone and not on ATC."
Yeah.
Okay, sir. And he said, and here's some of the conversations that have happened. He told 3 or 4 great conversations, and he was on center frequency.
Yeah. and that still happens, right?
Oh, I bet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It still happens. You'll hear people making a PA over the radio thinking they're talking to the because it's like this one goes to ATC. If you use this hand mic down here, this one goes to the people. I may have done that at one point.
Everyone has.
Or you're choosing. I'm kind of like, why is Denver Center not answering me? And then the flight attendants call up and say, hey, you're broadcasting over the PA,
Yeah.
right? I'm like, okay, well, everyone knows now. I'm trying to get a hold of Denver Center.
Yeah.
All right. So then, where does the story go from here?
Well, they closed. They had the Ketchikan Airport open, and they closed and they didn't pay Petersburg and Wrangell. They still were dirt. And so in 76, we started flying the 727 into Petersburg and Wrangell.
Because it was paved now?
It wasn't paved. We had a gravel kit.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So in 70, you said in 76?
They closed the Juno base, and I transferred down here to Seattle.
Okay. Yeah. And you're still on the Twin Otter here?
No. I'm on the. They got rid of the Twin Otters. They got rid of everything. That was the 1 year, I think, that we had nothing but 727.
So what year was that you went to the 727?
76.
76.
Yeah.
So you go from captain on the Twin Otter
To flight engineer.
to flight engineer. How was that flying your first jet?
I thought the flight engineer program for me was wonderful because I got to learn the airplane and watch the guys up front doing the flying.
Yeah.
And realize that I'm going to go a little faster than the Twin Otter went.
Right. How long then were you a flight engineer before you got to fly it?
Let's see. I went to co-pilot in 79 and then to captain in 82.
Wow.
However, a couple of buddies of mine, Mike McMillan and Dale Cayley, they were flight engineers in 76, and Dale went to co-pilot. He got hired in 66, went to co-pilot in 76. So he was a 10-year flight engineer.
Dang.
Yeah.
It just happens like that, doesn't it? Where some people it takes them,
Exactly.
the 10 years, then based on if they were hiring, what was that gap? Suddenly the upgrade time or the time from flight engineer to co-pilot goes from 10 years down to 2 or 3.
So Dale used to be an agent for Alaska Airlines in Anchorage. So he was engineer from 66 to 76, was co-pilot from 76 to 80, went to captain. He had to use some of his flight engineer time to get the ATP.
Yeah. Wow. Well, how was the airline doing then? Were you guys making money and things were growing, or was it always? Did you just feel like this thing could end at any time?
It could.
Yeah.
I got pretty involved in the union, and in 72, we talked to Bob Gray, who was the vice president of industrial relations later, and in 72, we did not take a raise. And he said, if you guys had taken a raise, we had bankruptcy papers ready to be signed. That close.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when Ron Cosgrave and Bruce Kennedy took over, there was a big change.
Yeah. Well, so you were there when it was Charlie Willis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whiskey Charlie.
Whiskey Charlie. Whiskey Charlie with what was his plane that he kept parked in the hangar? Didn't he have like a Mustang or something?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. So what was the change then when it went from like the Charlie Willis era to the Cosgrave era?
I think you knew you weren't going to get $100 paycheck, which we did. Everyone got $100 paycheck 1 year, one pay period. And one guy working on the ground, actually, that was a raise for him.
What was the thought of giving you guys $100 paycheck?
They didn't have any money. Yeah.
So they just gave everyone $100.
Yeah.
For a month of work?
2 weeks. Yeah.
Oh, for 2 weeks of work. Yeah. Wow.
Back in the Twin Otter days, there was a place in Fairbanks called Sally's Kitchen, and they put up all the Herc lunches for the crew members. And they didn't pay Sally's Kitchen. Now, Chuck Spaeth might have told you the story, but they came down to Juno. It was 7 o'clock in the morning.
Who did?
2 guys.
Okay.
And not realize, and they went out and got on the airplane on the Twin Otter. before they were boarding for Petersburg and attempted to steal it, repossess it for non-payment of crew lunches.
Oh, really?
And Jim Hickey, one of our pilots, went out and took the scissors, and so they couldn't taxi it.
Wow.
That was an exciting morning. I wasn't there, but I've heard great stories.
Wow. So someone was sent to repossess this airplane because the airline was not paying its bills.
Lunchbox bills.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
So being around Cosgrave and Kennedy was great.
Because they kind of cleaned up everything.
They did.
Yeah.
And it was operated like an airline.
You're right. Right. So tell me about your first flight on the 727. What was that like going from watching them fly to actually being able to be up there and fly it?
I don't remember.
Well, everyone always says that was such a great airplane.
It was. I was on it for 19 years.
So why was the 727 a great airplane to fly?
Super stable. Took, I think, a special technique to make landings, which were totally different than anything I've ever done in an airplane.
How's that?
Well, I would set the radio altimeter at 7 feet. And at 7 feet, I'd pull the power and push the nose
Okay.
instead of the flare thing.
Yeah. Is that to get it to pivot around so it would soften it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you just pulled back, you would just drive those mains into the ground. Huh?
You
Yeah.
bet.
Had a boy. So when you set that to 7 feet, would that give you like a horn or something? Or
No light would come on, and it's taken off the main
Gotcha.
trucks.
Gotcha. Okay. So 7 feet, power to idle, push forward. That's the way to do it in the 7.2, huh?
No, that's the way I did it.
You did it. So good.
Then I go on the MD, and my buddy Mike McMillan was giving me IOE, my first IOE on the MD. I got a good landing. He said, "Doc, we don't push.
Yeah.
How do I break 19 years?"
That's right.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit because you were furloughed 6 times.
Yep.
That could be a record.
It could be, but the pilot group 2 behind me, Eric Bennett, for example, they got furloughed for almost 5 years. So I was getting furloughed in the winter, and I'd become a bartender or do whatever it took. And but he got furloughed for 5 consecutive years.
Wow. So you were hired into the Twin Otter. Did they tell you that you're going to be laid off every single winter?
They said there's a good chance, yeah. I just wanted the number. I was young, single. Give me the number.
Right. So you would come in, work during the busy season, and then when things slowed down, would they park the Otters, or would they just?
No, they would keep flying, but they would reduce the flying on the jet, and those guys would bump us out.
I see.
Yeah.
So guys from the 7.2 would flow back down to the Twin Otters.
They were real excited about that.
And then you would flow down to the bar where you were working for the wintertime. And then when things would pick back up, the jet guys would move back to the jet.
Yeah,
And you would come back in.
that's it.
And you did that for 6 years.
Yeah. I could have gone on the jet in 75, but I looked at Dale Cayley. He was an engineer for 10 years, so I took captain on the Otter instead of flight engineer.
Did you have to do that when you were on the 7.2? Did you have to flow down and fly the Otters?
No. Once we got, in 76, we got rid of the Otters. It was pretty stable.
Yeah.
One year, in 1970, I went back to college, and I took, I took business law, real estate law, and income tax law. And how unique, I didn't care if I flunked. I just wanted to learn. Very unique, learn. And that was a lot of fun.
This was in 1970?
Yeah.
You just went back when you got laid off? You went back and just did that? Where at?
Montana.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So you're on the 727. You upgrade there to the captain position on that plane?
On the 27?
Yeah.
In 82.
So you flew the 7-2, you said, for how many years?
19,
Wow. Incredible. So then when did you move over to the MD-80?
1995.
Okay. 95, and then that was the plane that you retired on?
It was. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about that group of pilots in Juno, and specifically Drew and kind of his story.
Like I mentioned, basketball was king in Alaska. There were, they couldn't afford to take a football team on airplanes, and we didn't have the weather for baseball. So, and it was a big community event when there was a high school basketball game every Friday and Saturday night. New kid gets hired from Juno. He's 9 years younger than me, Drew Haig, and I get him as a flight engineer. And now we're starting to realize how many people we knew. And I remember your uniform numbers. I said, no, you don't. He said, yeah, 22 in white and 33 in black. And he said, you remember when you ran off the court at the end of the game, there was always a group of little kids down by the doors? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I was one of those kids, and you used to pat me on the head.
Wow.
And the co-pilot's going, oh, my God. And he said, you even gave me your autograph once. And I said, okay, this has gone too far. I did not do that. But we really enjoyed flying together, and then he upgraded to co-pilot, and I really had a good time with him, passing the lore of the 727 on.
Yeah.
We flew together, he and Doug Lane and I, 9 out of 12 months. So we just kind of bid together.
You guys were on the 7-2,
Yeah.
flying out of Seattle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you guys generally just stay up like in Southeast and do the Alaska run, or?
In the summertime, and then in the wintertime, we'd head for Phoenix.
Smart.
Yeah.
Smart. Wow. You mentioned that you kind of showed him the lore of the airplane. I think that's one way to say that you were kind of his mentor. And how did you approach that role when you would have a new first officer there? What was your way of doing that?
Well, first of all, you knew they were qualified. Now, if they want to pick your brain, have at it. But if they don't want to listen, do it your way. That's fine too. I got in a real argument with one of our captains who's a little bit senior to me, and he said, okay, we're going into Fairbanks, and the co-pilot's really high. And are you going to take the airplane? Are you going to tell him what to do? Or are you just going to let him do his thing? I said, I think it would depend on the individual, but I'm going to let him do his thing. And if he is not able to make the landing in Fairbanks or doesn't get shot down, I think he will always remember that. Geez, this guy got really mad at me. And he said, you're wasting fuel. But everyone has their own idea of that.
Yeah. It is true that you can glean experience from someone telling you how to do it, but some of the best lessons are when you actually learn it.
You bet.
Right?
Yep.
Because one day that co-pilot's going to be in the left seat, in the captain's seat, on that dark and stormy night.
For sure.
Yeah.
And if you take the airplane or you nitpick him on down, he's going to say, I could have done that. He's not going to believe that what the captain said.
Yeah. So we were talking about Drew. So you guys were both out there in Juno. The scholarship that's associated with his legacy now, right?
Yeah. The guy was really a good guy, and he was a very accomplished pilot. And, he and Bobby Jacobson started Wings of Alaska. And this guy went from working on the ramp for Alaska to flying float planes to being a flight engineer. And several months before he died, he upgraded to captain on 727. So Dale Cayley and Doug Lane and Greg Fort and I, 4 pilots, and one money man, Brad Kayla, we're going to get scholarships for kids that want to do what Drew did and be a pilot for Alaska Airlines. So we did it for 27 years, and we raised over $400,000. And at last count, Doug's keeping good track of this. There are 54 pilots that won the scholarship flying for Alaska.
Wow. So you're moving from the 727 to the MD-80. When did the incident with the mouse happen?
Oh, the mouse.
Yeah.
You know, I can almost talk about it now. That was 1987.
Okay.
We were flying the 727 from Anchorage to Seattle, 4 o'clock in the morning, 37,000 feet. And it was an American interchange. We had the Braniff interchange, American interchange, Continental interchange, where in the winter they would fly our airplane because we had extra airplanes. In the summer, we'd fly theirs because we needed airplanes. So the flight would go Dallas, Seattle, Anchorage, and then back the same way.
So their crew would fly from Dallas to Seattle.
Get off, and then we'd get on the American interchange.
Stuff that would never happen in today's world, right?
It sure worked well for Alaska.
Yeah.
And Kennedy and Cosgrave, used their head on that. And there weren't many differences in the 727s, except the other carriers were kind of underpowered. But anyway, we were at 37,000, and the flight attendant, Ricky Moss, Norwegian gal, came in the cockpit with coffee for us. And Drew Haig was the co-pilot. I remember the flight engineer. And I went to talk to her, and I turned to my right, and I felt something on my calf. And I immediately thought of the moths, M-O-T-H-S, moths, that the American airplanes had. They hang out under back in the instrument panel, and then all of a sudden they'd fly out at you. So I knew a moth was on my calf. And I moved a little bit more, and it kind of went up on my thigh. And the American airplane had a fresh air vent that you could pull.
Yeah.
We didn't have that, so I didn't mess with it. I thought maybe that's where this thing is coming on my leg. And I turned, and something ended up on my butt. And then it got to where Archie Bunker would call it the groinal area.
And so you still think this is a moth?
I still think it's a moth.
Yeah.
And so I took off for the bathroom, and I got in there, and I dropped my pants and my baby blue boxers. And I expecting to see a moth fly out, and I heard a thud, and I looked down. It was a mouse, little gray mouse, and it started going counterclockwise, hitting every corner. And
on the floor in the lab.
Yeah. And
this poor little mouse.
Poor mouse. And the brave captain ended up on the commode. With my pants around my ankles, I couldn't step up. I had a 2-footed leap. I'm looking down at this thing, and I thought, I could take off my boot and kill it, and that's going to be a real mess. Or I could reach over there and open the door. So I took that way out and opened the door, and the mouse headed for first class. And another flight attendant came up and said, "What's going on in there?" And I was kind of hyperventilating. I said, and she said, "I heard thumping going on." And I said, "Well, I dropped my wallet and I dropped my change." And she said, "Were you alone?" I was alone in the biffy, yeah. So I got back to the cockpit, and there's the three of them still staring like I hadn't left. And Drew said, "Was it a moth?" And I said, "No, it was a mouse." And I was kind of hyperventilating because I had this fear of those 12 rabies shots in your stomach. And Drew started Medic 1 in Juno. So I said, "Look, what am I going to do? Do I have to go to the hospital or something and have them check to see if it was rabid?" And he said, "No, you go home, and every 6 hours take 2 aspirin for 3 days. Stay in bed." And then what? And then what? And he said, "Well, at the end of the 3 days, if you don't have a tremendous craving for cheese, you're okay." Which isn't really what I wanted to hear.
So good.
They had to defumigate all the 727s. But I feel justified because two flight attendants separately told me they had found dead mice in their food carriers on the interchange with us.
Yeah.
So good to fumigate them.
Wow. Incredible. I want to talk a little bit about your wife, kind of how you met and her history with the airline.
She graduated from college and showed up in Juno in 1971. And I happened to be at the airport, and I kind of watched her walk across. I thought, yeah, that's pretty nice. You know, gosh, she's with Ed Rogers, who was the district sales manager. And I said, I bet she's a new ticket agent. She was.
Yeah.
And so we met in June, and in kind of started going out, but she had a boyfriend in Seattle. And then one thing led to another, and we got married in December,
Wow,
a few months later.
Yeah.
53 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
And she was a flight attendant for Alaska, right?
She was a ticket agent. She was a res agent. She was a supervisor. She was a training agent.
Oh.
And her last job, which was pretty interesting, we don't have it anymore. It was she flew in the air on the airplanes, long haul, and got you to switch over from United or Northwest, switch your tickets. And it's kind of gone full circle because that was my job when I started,
Yeah.
going into Pan Am's line.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, renegade sales. Get over and get people to switch their tickets, huh?
So we transferred, and she worked down here for probably 3 years, and that was her last job, was riding in the airplane selling.
Do you have any of those flights where you're like, man, I just learned a lot about flying from that flight that I just went on?
I think you're always learning, and that's one of the things I loved about the job. There were never, ever 2 days the same.
Yeah.
In 1979, we got our first brand new 727-200 stretch. We were really hot stuff. And the first flight was from Seattle to Ketchikan, and I was on it. Max gross landing was 160,000 pounds. ILS was out. I got to remember this. The ILS was out, and we're making the turn to land on 1-1. And Western went by and wanted the weather, going to Anchorage, wanted the weather in Kenai, Homer, Kodiak, every place up there. And of course, having a flight service, we were not required to notify them that we were inbound. But going by Guard Island, we always called and let them know. Well, we couldn't get on the radio because
Western had it tied up, asking for weather.
Yeah. So we landed. We got down. The co-pilot was flying. We touched down, and the nose gear was almost on the runway. And the captain yelled, "Jesus Christ, go around." And there was a sand truck and a plow center of the runway with us, 160,000 pounds. So we went over it. I didn't call over boost. We went over the truck, and the co-pilot and I feared we were 20 feet above the sand truck and the plow.
Sometimes it's just a game of inches, isn't it?
It is.
And just that one small factor of someone had the radio tied up could have led to hitting a truck on the runway.
That's what it always takes. There's got to be two things, not one. And Warren Metzger, we called him from Ketchikan. He was the chief pilot. And we told him what happened. He said, "Did you dent my new airplane?"
Wow. Did you know the crew on 261?
They were Jet America.
Yeah.
So I knew Ted, but I didn't know Bill Tansky.
Yeah.
Didn't know him, but I knew a couple of flight attendants casually.
Where were you when that accident happened?
Actually, I was home, and that was my route, one day off. And my daughter was home, and she worked for Alaska at the time, and she would pick the phone up and say, "Nope, he's here. Nope, he's here." People were calling knowing that was my route.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to the accident in 71, I got activated by the National Guard. They recovered the bodies and then flew them downtown Juno to the armory. And I had never seen a dead body. And Dick Levitt and I had to spend the night in the armory that first night. That was a little edgy. After 2 weeks, I found myself alone at the airport bar, and I started crying, and I couldn't stop. So I talked to myself, and I said, "Don't be a pussy. What would John Wayne think?" So I tucked that back into a little door, little closet in my brain, and I was fine. 30 years later, we had 261, and now instead of counting sheep, I was counting body bags. So we didn't have the things that ALPA have now, a critical response team and all that. You just were on your own.
Yeah.
And so I went and got some help, and there's a couple of guys that I owe my career to. Yeah.
Wow. I think what is commonly forgotten is that, especially back in those days, when there was an accident, it was pilots out there.
Yeah.
Pilots were sent out to the accident site to start to retrieve, right?
Yeah.
I think we just always think of, oh, someone else is going to handle that and they're going to investigate it, and I'm glad that it wasn't me, but there's a real personal connection.
There is, and particularly when you know people. Other than just the crew members, you know people on the airplane. Chuck Spaeth was on the hillside. I was at the morgue, and I don't know which would be my preference if I had to do it again.
What did Warren Metzger ask of you?
Oh, he wanted to know. He knew that I was a staff sergeant and I was in the morgue, and I was a young co-pilot for Alaska, and he wanted to know when the 3 pilots were identified, and asked me if I would go through the body bags until there was identification. And probably being young and dumb and wanting to please your boss, I said, "Oh, sure." Yeah.
Do you think that changes you as a pilot? Or I guess what I'm asking is, when you got at the controls the next time that you went and flew, did doing those duties, did that change the way that you looked at your job, your career, your profession, or was it an entirely separate incident?
I think it was separate. I had somebody one time, we went through, the only time I ever reported greater than moderate turbulence. And I can't tell you if it was a flight attendant or a passenger, told me how I saved them. I wanted to say, I'm actually thinking about my rear end. And if my rear end is okay, yours is going to be okay too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't say that.
Those are the things that we don't say, right?
Yeah.
Where was your most favorite place to fly to?
In 1992, I bought a condo in Arizona. I would say probably Phoenix.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Because then you could just go over to your condo there, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife I was involved in the union and she was involved in management. We went to see the CEO, John Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
She directly worked for him and said, "You know what? Western had that triangle fare to Hawaii. This would be a great time for us to do it." And I think we kind of irked him a bit because we mentioned it several times. And now look, as soon as I retire, look what happened. You guys have like 130
Yeah.
flights a week or something?
It's like 25 or 30% of the operation now goes
Amazing.
to the islands.
Amazing.
Well, I was just having this talk with, one of these pilots because there could be some more changes coming, right, in terms of fleet and, planes and whatnot. And you just never know, do you?
No.
Because when you got hired back in 69, 70, you thought, oh, well, maybe I'm going to fly this prop for the rest of my life. And I've got a jet there too option. So maybe I'll fly a 727. And that's what you think is like, that's where you're going to be.
Yeah.
And then the MD-80 comes along. And then for those other pilots, the 7.3, and who knows what else is going to come, right?
And now you're all one fleet, but
Yeah.
we're starting that thing again.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the memories now that you kind of carry forward? Like, what's the feeling in your heart about you were an airline pilot and you look up and you see a plane up in the sky? Can you still see yourself up there?
If I look up there and I see that it's an MD-80, I'd say, geez, I feel really good here.
Yeah.
And if it's a 727, which we don't see them anymore,
Right.
but if I saw a 727, I would say, I don't think I could probably pass a check, but I could take you on a trip and not harm you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that airplane.
Yeah.
I also enjoyed the camaraderie with the pilots. We were small enough. You knew everyone's name. You knew everyone's wife's name, and probably a lot of the kids.
Yeah.
And in 72, I got furloughed. I was on my way to L.A. to interview with Western. And I got as far as the carvery room in SeaTac, and I turned around and went back. Said, this isn't going to work out good. You change horses in the middle of the stream, and you've got all these great guys. Why do you want to leave? So I didn't. And I went through more furloughs, but I never looked back.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to be able to spend 35 years at one airline.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for inviting us into your house, for sharing your incredible story, for 35 years.
This has been good. You tested me.
35 years of aviation excellence.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.